Welcome back. Now, one of the political parties that has vocally been unhappy with some of the lockdown regulations is the Democratic Alliance. Yesterday, the North Gauteng High Court in Pretoria declared the level 3 and 4 lockdown regulations unconstitutional and invalid. DA Interim Leader John Steenhuisen joined us via Skype this morning. Mr. Steenhuisen, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I think the question then is, what are your views of the judgment as handed down by the North Gauteng High Court last night?
Well, we certainly welcome the judgment, and we regard it as a very good portent for the number of cases that we have before the North Gauteng High Court, but also for the constitutional challenge which we've initiated against the Disaster Management Act and its lack of accountability and oversight. So I think this was a setback for government yesterday evening, and I think a victory for the citizens of the Republic of South Africa, who have had to labour under irrational and unreasonable regulations, many of which had nothing whatsoever to do with combating COVID-19 and everything to do with power trips of various individuals within the NCC.
As we've heard, a lot of, you ask any lawyer, you'll get different answers as to the validity of the outcome from yesterday. What is your thoughts? Can governments or do governments have a leg to stand on? And as you've said, some of the regulations, as far as the judgment was concerned, did leave with questions, but some are quite valid.
Absolutely. And, that's the thing about this COVID virus. It's about balancing a health response with rationality and reasonableness. To make situations like this work, you have to have a compact between government and citizens, where you give them information and you act in a reasonable and rational way. And I think that we saw the buy-in, the huge buy-in at the beginning of the crisis when we went into the original hard lockdown level 5. For those 3 weeks, there was a lot of compliance from citizens. But then as government started to break that compact and become petty and irrational with the regulations, they lost the buy-in from many, many citizens. And that's when you started to see these court challenges being instituted. I think government should take a step back, look very carefully at how it can repair the compact between itself and citizens, and look at ways ensuring how we can manage this virus, which is going to be with us for 18 to 24 months, in a reasonable, rational way, in a way which is justifiable given the health threat that is posed, and to stay away from using the virus as a way to drive through ideological flights of fancy.
Some would say the means justify the ends, and as far as government is concerned, theirs was, look, we try and minimize contact out there as far as people are concerned, because COVID-19, as you said as well, nobody knows where our peak will be or how far this is going to go. So one would say government thought, look, the means justifies the ends, so why not go at it that way? What is your take on that?
Well, I don't think that the ends justify the means when they are irrational and petty. And when you end up with a situation where by week 3 of the lockdown, you had more deaths from police brutality than from the virus itself, you can never argue that the ends justify the means then. And the government lost the credibility when they started to delve into the pettiness of what you could drink, what you could smoke, what you could wear, and how you must wear it, as well as subjecting democratic citizens to a military curfew, which was completely unnecessary, limiting exercise for 3 hours in the morning where you get the entire nation out on the streets. Yeah. I think that government lost a lot of traction when it started to go down that road.
Yeah. Mr. Steenhuisen, I'm going to ask you to pause there for a second. We're just going to have to say goodbye to our SABC 2 viewers. Unfortunately, we've run out of time with them. We will continue this interview, though, on SABC News Channel 404. Steenhuisen, thank you very much indeed for staying with us. Now, what do you think the way forward in as far as this is concerned? The state of disaster comes to an end, I think, in a couple of weeks' time anyway. Do we say governments are going to wait until then to reapply themselves or apply the new regulations or work on what the judgment says? What is your thought process looking ahead at this now?
Well, I imagine with an endless supply of taxpayer money that they will obviously try and appeal this judgment. I think that would, that's their right to do so. But I think a far more constructive thing would be for them to have a look very carefully at how they could rebuild the trust with citizens, and let's get in place some regulations that make sense. The virus is going to be with us for 18 to 24 months, perhaps even longer. We're going to have measures to combat the virus and to keep citizens safe, but also we have to protect livelihoods of citizens. And you can only do that when you balance the health response reasonably and rationally. So there are still going to have to be regulations about mask wearing in public, around social distancing, against big gatherings, certainly until there's a vaccine or a form of treatment, because what you want to do is to try and stop the spread as much as possible, whilst trying to manage a phased opening up of the economy that protects the livelihoods of South Africans. Yeah. And so I think that government can still try and get the balance right, but it's going to mean that they're going to have to humble themselves and admit that some of the stuff they did was wrong and set about correcting it as quickly as possible.
One could say the DA, for example, has for a while had a problem with some of the government's regulations. Looking ahead now with regards to level 3, level 2, level 1, we've heard scientists say, well, maybe we should go down to level 1, and we know that to not allow pickets, something unrelated to the judgment yesterday. How do you think so far South Africa has handled the lockdown and COVID-19?
Well, I think that the initial lockdown of 3 weeks was the right thing to do. At that stage, we didn't have data. We didn't know the extent of what it was going to be. We didn't know what the effects on South Africa would be. And of course, we had to assess our health preparedness. So I think it was the right thing to lock down hard and to lock down early. And that's why we supported the president in that. But it became very obvious after week 3 that this was not something that we would be able to sustain going forward, given the fragility of our economy, but also the fragility of South African households, who by week 3, many of those households had been brought to a point of food insecurity and very dire financial situations. And this is the extension of that hard lockdown has come at a huge price to the South African economy, and we're still going to feel that pain as the economy starts to tumble going forward. And that's going to be the next big challenge, about how we start to rebuild our economy and start build some resilience into it, and to have an economy, I think, that's fairer and that opens up more opportunities for many more South Africans who've remained locked out of economic opportunity through the failed policy suite of the last 2 decades.
Yeah. Monday we saw an easing down to level 3. We saw many more South Africans go to work or go back to work. We know that some schools, well, schools are supposed to open. That didn't happen. The Western Cape, you did go ahead with the opening of schools. Your take on that, on kids, on children particularly, going back to school?
Well, I had a very good interaction on my coronacast yesterday with a pediatric pulmonologist, and she set out very clearly the science around why children under the age of 18 are the lowest risk, and that they're not the super spreaders that they originally were thought to be, and the evolution of the science now around that. So we believe that going back to school on the 1st of June was the right call to make for those schools that are ready and have the PPE in place, and that's exactly what the DA government in the Western Cape went ahead and did under the leadership of Premier Windy and MEC Schaefer. And it's been relatively successful, the opening of the schools. And what we have to do is try and save the academic year as much as possible. And that children remain 1% of the worldwide cases are children under the age of 18. And that's it's a risk, a balance that has to be made, and provided the schools can practice PPE, social distancing and the like, they should be able to save the academic year.
The question then came in when that happened on Monday. It was a question of saying, look, the Western Cape, we thought we'd be in solidarity with the rest of the country. Kids are being left behind everywhere else. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, education is a concurrent competence between national and provincial government in terms of the Constitution. Our government in the Western Cape made a judgment call that we'd rather try and save the academic year and not disadvantage other learners. And by the independent panel that was set up by the minister to assess school readiness, they released their report saying that both Gauteng and the Western Cape were overwhelmingly ready to begin the year. And so the Western Cape government carried out the minister's gazette to the letter. It was gazetted 1st of June. Even in the regulations and the renewed gazette that was released yesterday, the date of 1 June is still listed in there. So the Western Cape government was ready, and we felt that the minister had made the right call, and we've gone out and implemented it. And I think that in the final analysis, when we look back at this time, I think it's going to be widely regarded as the right decision to have made.
Dear Interim Leader John Steenhuisen joining us via Skype. Thank you indeed, sir, for speaking to us right here on the agenda on SABC News Channel. And of course, just getting some reaction on the lockdown regulations that came through yesterday. The High Court judgment from the North Gauteng High Court declaring the level 3 and 4 lockdowns as unconstitutional and invalid. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, sir. We'll take a quick break. Stay